Tim Wilson, our esteemed speaker and volunteer extraordinaire, who's going to talk about your communications connection. Your communications connection, Tim Wilson.
If you're doing any sort of business, most likely at some time or another, you have to give or receive feedback, right? You ever had a feedback session? Someone give you feedback, you did feedback. A few of you, Ken's not going to admit it, but professors...
I've been at a fed up.
Ken, it's a fed up session, okay. That works too. But the thing about feedback is that there are 3 steps to feedback. And what happens to most people is they forget about the 3rd step. That's the 3rd step that's most important. I didn't know that, but actually from Toastmasters, I was able to find out about that and learn about how that works. Before getting to the 3rd step, I have to talk first about the 1st steps of feedback. The 1st step of feedback is something that should be obvious. Maybe you're thinking, well, duh, Tim, I mean, that's just kind of the way it works. But actually, a lot of people skip the 1st step and go right to the 2nd step. It happens all the time. Because the 1st step is simply about the problem. The problem. Have you ever been into a feedback session or at a meeting, and people kept on talking about the problem, and you gradually understood after a while that this person thought the problem was this person thought the problem was that, this person thought the problem was another thing, and they're all talking about different problems? You know what I'm talking about? Yes, exactly. The problem, the first thing you have to do before you get to the 2nd step is to identify what the problem is. And that's the most important. Because otherwise, you can't possibly go to the 2nd step until you get clear on what the problem is. So how do you figure out what the problem is in the feedback session? Well, here's the thing. In communication, there are 2 types of people. There's the person who's speaking and the person who's listening. And you've got to decide which one you're doing. Because doing both at the same time just doesn't work. I've tried it before. Trust me, it doesn't work. Somebody's speaking, you have to be listening to them. Not just listening to think, okay, what am I going to say to trump this idiot's idea after it comes my turn to speak? Not that. But actually listening. Because that's the only way you really get at what the problem is. Now, if you're in a meeting situation, you may have different ideas what the problem is. Because I think the problem is this. Well, I think the problem is that. You say, well, then you've got to have some sort of agreement. Some sort of situation where you say, okay, you think the problem is this, but couldn't you also agree with some of these other things here? This could also be the problem too. To get all of that together. Now, it's a little different if you've got a situation where you're in a feedback session with your boss or your professor, in Ken's case. In that case, first thing to do is to get them to explain what the problem is exactly. And that could be a challenge right there. For instance, if you think all the way back to when this talk started, Ted, my boss, said, why aren't you booking my hotels? Was that really the problem? I didn't know. So what I'd have to do is I have to say, okay, Ted, tell me exactly what you think, what in your opinion the problem is. How would you define that problem? It's really important to define the problem. Once you get that clear, you say, well, the problem is maybe not just booking the hotels. Maybe the problem is that I've got a whole bunch of hotels I can go to, and none of the hotels you pick are hotels that I like. Maybe there are other hotels that would be acceptable. So it's all about the problem. Once you identify the problem, then you go to the 2nd step. And the 2nd step is something people tend to jump into. The 2nd step is something that people tend to not really get as well, although they get better at the problem. The 2nd step is the solution. The solution. And here again, just like with the problem, when you're identifying the problem and trying to figure out what the problem is, a lot of times people have solutions, but they'll have different solutions. They'll have different solutions maybe for different problems, because if you haven't identified what the problem is, I got a solution for this, I got a solution for that, I got a solution for that, but it doesn't really go back to solve and fix the problem. So if you have a solution, make sure the solution is relevant to your problem. Make sense? Yeah. So if you have a solution, make sure the solution is relevant to your problem. And here, actually is a case where you can use off-the-cuff techniques. You remember, off-the-cuff techniques, you taught about your first thought. That leads to a next thought. Then you get a lot of different next thoughts. You get the details of things. That'll lead to a new thought. Some sort of new thought, some sort of new idea. So here's a place you can do off the cuff. You say, well, what if we did this? How would that work? Or what if we did that? How would that work? How would all of these things fit together? How would all these things work in coming to that common solution? So figuring out what that solution is and how it is so very important once you have the problem and then once you have the solution. What many people do is they stop there. That's it. They figure, okay, maybe we've done this. I've got a problem. Okay, I've got the problem. Now I got a solution. Everything's solved. No problem. No problem anymore. We got the solution. We'll implement the solution. Everything will be just fine. Have you ever done that or been in a meeting where everybody kind of basically does that? You know what that's about, Marty?
Absolutely.
Problem, solution, hey, we're good to go. And then what happens sometimes? Problem starts up again and nobody knows it. Nobody's any clue that a new problem has come up. Because that's the third step. The most important step in any feedback situation, and that is follow-up. Follow-up. In fact, you could say feedback is follow-up. Because when you follow up at the very end, you've got to basically say, okay, let's meet together another month or so and figure out, did the problem get solved? Is the problem still going on? So basically you start the whole process all over again. So, okay, what's the problem? Is there still a problem? No problem? Great, we're done. If there is a problem, what is the problem? Or what is the new problem that was caused? And then, what are some of the solutions? Brainstorming solutions, use that off-the-cuff method. And then, we're going to meet in another month and figure out if we finally solved the problem this time. You go over and over and over. So, follow-up really is feedback. And follow-up is the core, most important thing you can do in a feedback session. That's what really gets people involved to really make sure that that feedback is effective and that feedback is useful. All right, now as promised, I did want to give a chance for your thoughts and your ideas. It's a business setting. In Allstate, you have different ideas and thoughts. Talk about some of the feedback sessions that you've had, you've heard about, you know about, or that you've discovered out of feedback sessions you've had, somebody else has had, or you've heard about. And just what are some of the challenges? What are some of the issues? What are some of the things that came up that prevented the feedback working the way that you really think it should? So just get together with your friends, your neighbors soon to be your friends, and just have a little bit of a talk session for about a minute or so, and come back and share what you have.
What about my feelings? We have a problem. We have a solution. Nobody asked me how I feel about it.
Okay, what is the situation? Are you the employee?
Yes.
Okay, and then am I the boss?
Yes.
Okay, so your feeling is hurt?
Get over it. Get over it, kid. I'm the boss. I'm the problem. The reason I say that is I feel women. Women talk to men about their problems. Men offer a solution, and then the woman gets upset. She didn't care about the solution. She didn't care about the man understanding her feelings. Is that right?
Is that right? That's it. So you're solution. So then,
Well, the solution, the problem is never solved, but the woman feels a lot better.
exactly
So,
right.
yeah, I understand.
Right. You have answered that.
So, relevant to this, I guess, if you're getting feedback, you have to figure out who you're giving feedback to, and whether the solution to the problem is really what the person wants, or do they want support, emotional support, sharing.
So what would be the follow-up?
Follow-up, I take them out to dinner. Take her out to dinner and have a drink.
That's excellent.
Hear me?
All right.
Clap once. Hear me? Clap once. And one more time. All right. It's fun to talk about other people's problems. sometimes. Or get the chance to get a little bit of a B session about some of those things maybe have been sticking in your head, some of those problems with feedback. Feedback is something that people usually have kind of passionate ideas about, really bad feedback sessions. So, time to share and to dish, as they say. Marty, go ahead.
Ken and I were talking about how, in my case, it's difficult to get feedback that's honest and authentic because I train strangers sometimes and they don't want to be honest about they don't want to be critical.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of pull feedback out of them. It's very difficult.
Okay. So that people don't really give you what the problem is. You can't really figure out what the problem is. And so you create solutions for something that really isn't their problem?
Yeah, it's very low level stuff.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
It's not really making a difference.
So maybe they say, that's really not solving the problem. Say, but this was the problem you said you had. Why isn't it solving it? Well, the problem's a little bigger than that. How do you dig deeper? How do you get deeper at what the problem is?
I have a key phrase I tell people, because the name of my company is Digital Ninja. I say, don't pull any punches. We're digital ninjas. We can handle it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it goes. Other thoughts? Yeah, Ken, go ahead.
Well, sometimes in a feedback session you think there's a problem that you're trying to solve. But actually, she just wants to hear that you understand her feelings and you see and the follow-up is dinner and some drinks.
Hey, some feedback sessions, you just want to give them a big hug and
That's it.
solve everything.
Right.
Exactly. And sometimes that solves the problem. They're like pretty sad. I got a solution for you. Oh, we're all feeling together. If that worked for you, we'll do it next month over group hugs. Yeah.
One thing that I notice in feedback sessions is that a lot of times you might even do really good at defining the problem before you start talking about different solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But as you start talking about the solutions and more solutions and more solutions, you forget about the problem and no one sat there and reiterated it.
Exactly.
So that when you found a solution, no one actually goes through the process of asking, okay, this is our problem, is this solution going to work for that problem?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So sometimes, would you agree with this? It's because the problem really wasn't so well defined at the beginning that people didn't really know what the problem was. They got all these solutions, but it doesn't really go back to what basically that problem is and make sure that problem works. Yeah, that can be a huge issue. Huge issue. Yeah, David.
I always ask my boss for more negative feedback because I don't seem to get it from him, and I think he just wants to be nice and not, since we have an ongoing business relationship, he doesn't want to give me the negative stuff. And maybe we'll hit a sales target, and I'll say, okay, what did I do negatively? He said, well, what do you mean? We got the target or something. And there's still a lot of things you can get out of, a conversation where you get some negative feedback.
Interesting. I've never heard people really
negative feedback.
Want negative feedback before. I've gone to someone that's all positive feedback. Say, hey, you're happy, I'm happy. Everything's good. But maybe you're afraid there's some hidden thing that's coming up that might be an issue.
Well, I would just like there to be more positive and negative, not just the
constructive.
positive.
What you can do to develop.
Some people are afraid to give negative feedback.
Okay. So in that case, maybe it's just a situation where it doesn't really say, you don't know what the problem is at all. And maybe there's a problem, maybe there isn't, but I don't know. It sounds like there should be some sort of problem here, but I'm not seeing that sort of thing. So how do you deal with that? How do you handle that?
I seem to have to ask for it.
Okay.
Say, okay, let's pretend that it was all great. Let's put that on the shelf, and now let's talk about if we were to do it differently, how maybe should we go about it, and you can backtrack into getting some negative feedback.
Okay. That helps to get effective feedback and make that work. Okay. Lee, did you have anything? I was curious. You knew about it. I know you knew about a situation which they really weren't.
Well, I always been very big on defining the problem, and sometimes the problem is caused by lack of common definitions, something as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you define the problem, I make sure that everybody understands the terms that we are using. I also was telling Megan and David of one technique that I use, and that is to ask why at least 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you say the problem is this, and you ask why, and then you think, oh, because of this, you end up realizing that what you thought was the problem, there were symptoms. In reality, were symptoms.
Right.
So what you want to do is go deep.
Why? About figuring out what that problem
Why?
is. Yeah.
And then once we have, there is no more whys. People have identified the root cause.
Yes.
Then I go to what I call the naked reality, which is tell me all the facts that are surrounding this problem,
Mhm.
and I wanted to see them raw. I don't want it dressed. I don't
Right.
want it. I want it as raw as possible.
Right.
And then after we all eye these common definitions, understand root, understand the naked reality.
Once you get it, then you start.
Then you start going into ideation, and then finally you do the same thing as Steve was suggesting, which is what we have done here to see if we really solve the problem, because it really does what it's supposed
Yeah.
to do.
And it does go back to that really question, and a lot of other ideas I'm sure you have and think about in feedback sessions too that didn't work, but it really goes back to understanding what the problem is. But the reason the problem keeps coming is because at some point, no one really to that point of following up and saying, okay, we did something here. Let's go follow up and make sure that that problem actually is solved. Now, you may be wondering, Tim, what the heck does it have to do with Toastmasters? What the heck does it have to do with, public speaking, this sort of thing? But actually, the feedback process is the same sort of thing you do in a speech. Same sort of thing you do in a speech. You want to identify there's going to be a problem. Ideally, there'll be a problem. And then there'll be a solution for it. So you got a problem of, well, let's say about hotels. Okay, I don't know how to book them, and you're not getting hotels booked. Then you got a solution. Okay, well, I'll book the hotels further in advance. Then you have a follow-up, a way that you know that problem is solved. And you'll know the problem is solved with hotels because you start getting them in on time, you start getting in where you're supposed to be, you start being more content, you notice your travel goes smoother, easier, simpler. That's also a speech process. So you come to Toastmasters, you can actually practice that feedback process by working your speech through problem, solution, and follow-up. And the better you get at that and practicing it, the better you get at giving feedback, the better you get at receiving feedback. So you start feeling, okay, there's a gap of the problem, gap of the solution, gap of the follow-up. You can bring that up in the meeting before you get too far down the pipe and things just kind of blow up as they sometimes have a tendency to do. All right, covered a lot of things today. Just wanted to recap.
Well, I appreciate that.